Okay. Well, thanks for coming out this afternoon, folks. There's a lot going on here this afternoon, a lot of great events, but personally I want to thank you for taking some time to think about the Homeland. My name's Guy Swan. In a former career life, I was the Army North Commander and then spent 10 years as Vice President here at AUSA. So this topic area is near and dear to me personally, and obviously to many of you as well. So thank you for attending. The topic today is the future of Homeland Defense, setting the theater for multi-domain operations. A quick summary about AUSA. We're the Army's professional association. All of you recognize that. And we're proud to put on these types of forums in addition to all of the great exhibits down on the exhibit floor. We do these things throughout the year to broaden the knowledge base of Army professionals and others who support the United States Army. AUSA throughout the year amplifies the Army's narrative, now especially with the new Army Chief of Staff, who some of you heard earlier today. And we're the voice for the Army, and we support the soldier and have done that since 1950. Of course, we can't do this alone. Our AUSA relies on its members to help tell the Army story and to support soldiers and their families. A strong membership base is vitally important for our advocacy in Congress, in the Pentagon, and in the defense industrial base, and in communities across the nation through AUSA's 122 chapters throughout the country and in 9 overseas countries. If you're an AUSA member, raise your hand, please. Yeah, thank you for your membership. That goes a long way to the mission I just described. And for those of you that are not yet members, we encourage you to join. It's not that expensive, easy to sign up either downstairs at the AUSA Pavilion or at the entrance area where you came in and registered. There's a membership booth there, or you can go online at ausa.org. We are glad to have our panel here. There's a couple of gifts under the table that you can look at later, and we really appreciate we kept it under the ethics limits, so you don't have to worry about that one. But on behalf of General Brown, our President and CEO, we really appreciate you all being here. A lot going on in the world today, every day, and it seems to be getting more and more so. But we can't take our eye off the ball in the homeland, and that's exactly what this panel is all about, is to discuss how you and I collectively can safeguard our citizens and our friends right here at home. So I'm going to turn this over to our moderator, Major General Jim Bonner, the Deputy Commander at U.S. Army North, to introduce our panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, welcome to this year's AUSA Homeland Security Seminar, The Future of Homeland Defense, Setting the Theater for MDO. And as was announced, I'm Major General Jim Bonner, the Deputy Commanding General for U.S. Army North, and it's my honor to be able to introduce General VanHerck. General VanHerck is the commander of North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, and U.S. Northern Command. NORAD, a binational command with Canada, conducts aerospace warning, aerospace control, and maritime warning in defense of North America. U.S. NORTHCOM conducts homeland defense, defense support to civil authorities, and security cooperation with Canada, Mexico, and the Bahamas to defend and secure the United States and its interests. He has commanded at the squadron, group, and twice at the wing level. As a Major General, he commanded the U.S. Air Force Warfare Center, and his staff assignments included tours as Chief of the B-2 Program Element Monitor, the Director of Operations at Headquarters Air Force Global Strike Command, the Director of Plans and Integration at U.S. Strategic Command, the Vice Director of Strategy, Plans, and Policy at the Joint Staff, and the Vice Director of the Joint Staff. During his time in command, he's guided NORAD and U.S. NORTHCOM to adapt to an increasing, complex strategic environment. His efforts have helped shape the department and interagency view of the #1 priority of our nation's Homeland Defense. He has worked tirelessly with fellow combatant commanders, partners, allies, and the interagency to conduct, develop, and prepare the U.S. homeland for any possible future conflict, and we're honored to have him speak here today. General VanHerck. Thank you, sir.
Well, that was way too much, Jim, but I appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. I think this is really a really important discussion. I look forward to kind of teeing up a few questions for the panel here. Hopefully some thought-provoking comments here that'll get you jotting some questions down for them. The good news is I don't have to answer the questions. They do. And so I sincerely appreciate that. Seriously, if you do have a question for me, I'll be happy to take your question. Anything's fair game, including Chinese spy balloons. Be happy to talk to you about that, okay? Okay. General Swan, thank you so much for what you do, your service, setting the foundation for Army North down there, doing great things. And General Bonner, thanks for the kind introduction. We really appreciate it. You have a great panel here. I have to first thank Rebecca Zimmerman, DASD Zimmerman, who stepped in unannounced here. We were going to have one of her bosses, ASD, was going to come in, but Rebecca's here today, and we're happy to have you. And Maria as well. Thanks for being here. Talk about cyber. One of my great partners every single day, Deanne Criswell from FEMA. Thanks for being here, Deanne. And then obviously Lieutenant General John Evans, who works for me as the Army North and my Joint Force Land Component Commander. So thank you very much. Hey, I want to talk to you a little bit about the environment that we live in. Candidly, I'm probably not going to talk about what you expect me to talk about. The first thing I'm going to talk about is environmental change. Environmental change is a challenge to us right now, okay? Especially here in the homeland, it creates opportunities, it creates vulnerabilities. The question is, what are we going to do about them? I know Deanne Criswell appreciates environmental change with the challenges that she faces. More hurricanes, more wildfires. But really what we're seeing is the environment, especially in the Arctic, is creating opportunities and vulnerabilities for our competitors to take advantage of. The closest avenue approach to the homeland is through the Arctic. Just recently, Russia has sailed twice through the Arctic to provide fuel to the PRC, sanctioned. They're not supposed to be doing that. Normally, they'd have to go west to provide that fuel. Now they're going east through the Bering Strait down the east side of China and providing that fuel. So significant things happening, changing in the Arctic, something that we need to keep an eye on. 52% of my AOR is in the Arctic, and I'm the DOD's designated capabilities advocate for the Arctic. So I care very much about what goes on in the Arctic and the challenges that we face. What I've said publicly, and I'll say it here publicly, when asked about the Arctic, I say it's kind of like a football game. I use the analogy. To play the game, you got to be on the field, and we're in a locker room developing a game plan. Everybody's had a strategy. We've had strategy for the department since 2019. That strategy is getting updated. All the services have strategies. But we haven't resourced those strategies, candidly, and I think that's really, really important to point out. I do want to talk about the rest of the globe, and it's certainly the most dynamic and challenging that I've seen in more than 36 years of service. Strategic stability is eroding on a day-to-day basis. I would tell you that we're under attack every day in the cyber domain and the information space. In the cyber domain, our critical infrastructure is being, capabilities planted there to prevent our forward power projection. In the information space, our democracy is being undermined. The internal strife that we faced, oftentimes those flames are perpetuated by our external actors, our potential adversaries on a day-to-day basis. Russia is the primary military threat to me in the homeland right now. Now, I'm not trying to get sideways with the Secretary. The bottom line is the PRC is the pacing challenge for us and a long-term existential threat. But many people believe that Russia has failed in the Ukraine. What I would say is they've faced significant challenges in the land domain with logistics, with C2, and much more. But if you look back since February of 22, when Russia invaded Ukraine illegally, immorally, unethically, they've been more active around the globe, specifically focused on our homeland, in the air domain, undersea, in the maritime domain, on a routine basis. And I expect to see that continue as we continue moving forward. And I expect to see that more with the PRC. They have been working combined together. I expect to see that to continue in multiple domains. They've done that in the maritime domain. I expect to see that continue in the air domain. Both of them are peers in the cyber and the space domains as well. I like to say that from a kinetic capability that the PRC is about 8 to 10 years behind where Russia is with regards to the homeland today. When I look at the DPRK missile threat continues to grow. Solid fueled booster presents significant challenges for indications and warning for me to be able to see ahead of time and be able to respond in a timely manner. Last year, I believe we saw more than 70 launches from the DPRK. It hasn't been quite as many this year, but we should expect to see more. Candidly, they'll probably surpass my capability to provide deterrence by denial through our ground-based defense capabilities, our ballistic missile defense system, in the not-too-distant future. And they continue to develop capabilities that will challenge me from deception denial capabilities. As far as Iran, I significantly worry about Iran, not necessarily from a direct threat, but mainly through proxies. Right now, Iran could probably develop a nuclear weapon within a matter of weeks to a short-term year. But their biggest challenge is to deliver an ICBM in a timely manner that could project that power to our homeland. But I absolutely worry about them providing materials, such as radiological, biological types of materials, that a proxy actor or others could provide here in the homeland. So that's a significant concern. And the final thing I'll talk about is transnational criminal organizations. They're a global problem, a multi-domain problem, and they're a problem right here in the homeland. What we see most of the time when we talk about are the symptoms of the problem. The symptoms we see are human migration, human trafficking, the narcotics flows, the challenges that we see coming across the border. Those are a symptom, folks. The problem is we have transnational criminal organizations with weapons capabilities on par with nation states around the globe. It's a business model with significant capability, and we have to go after them, sever the head off the snake. We know how to do that. We did it with ISIS. We've done it with Al-Qaeda. We go after the weapons. We go after the funding. I would ask you to think about it and ask some folks on the stage, who owns that problem set for our country? Ask them. Let them answer it for you. I'm not sure they can answer it. Okay? I don't own it. Okay? But I'm worried about it. And the reason I'm worried about it is because it creates opportunity for nations such as the PRC, Russia, violent extremists, Iran, and others to have access and influence right here in the Western Hemisphere, close to our homeland. And that is ongoing as I stand here and speak to you today. And so we have to care about those transnational criminal organizations. So I said earlier, strategic stability is eroding, and I firmly believe that. That's what keeps me thinking, keeps me up a little bit at night, the unknown specifically. And I'll talk a little bit about that. You heard General Bonner talk about our missions. On the NORAD side, I provide aerospace warning. Think about that, of a threat to North America that could be a ballistic missile, it could be a hypersonic, it could be a cruise missile, an airplane, multiple things. And I have to identify those to assess on a routine basis within minutes, is that a threat to North America? I'll tell you, I'm being challenged there, especially on hypersonics, especially on cruise missiles, with antiquated domain awareness systems that today challenge my ability to provide that threat warning, attack assessment, or aerospace warning. Why is that crucial? Because it erodes strategic stability. My ability to provide that directly contributes to continuity of government, our nuclear force posture survival, the posturing of the forces to ensure we have an assured second strike capability. What we're going to see is more of. The PRC is actively working in their capabilities, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. Think of the utilization of commercial types of vessels that will challenge my ability to provide that threat warning. If it is a threat, I do have the capability to do what's called aerospace control, and that's to defend against those threats. But that is really limited. In its day, NORAD had more than 2,000 fighters on alert and around. Today we have, let's just say, a couple dozen, okay? And that's where we are today in a world that is significantly, what I would say, more challenging than maybe anything we've seen since the end of the Cold War. And then maritime warning. On a day-to-day basis, as the NORAD commander, I'm tracking 150, 200 vessels sailing around that might have potential terrorists on them, hazardous materials that might have intelligence collection capabilities or be a threat to the homeland. And again, as the Russians and the PRC develop submarines and capability, that is being challenged as well. As far as Homeland Defense in my NORTHCOM hat, think ballistic missile defense, think maritime homeland defense. Again, both being challenged on a day-to-day basis, as well as defense support of civil authorities. The team up here provides a lot of that for me. The R North team provides defense support of civil authorities on a routine basis, working with FEMA, especially on disaster response, disaster preparedness. I would tell you that defense support of civil authorities mission is crucial to integrated deterrence. Our ability to demonstrate our readiness, our responsiveness, our resiliency, most importantly, will have a factor on anybody's decision to come after us, especially in our homeland, or to take action somewhere else, knowing that we're so resilient and so capable. And so when messaged properly, I think that's crucial. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. Candidly, I'm most worried about the cyber domain. And you need to ask some great questions of Maria up here in a little bit. About 80% of our critical infrastructure that I rely on to project power out of the homeland doesn't reside under General Nakasoni's authority to defend or Jen Easterly at CISA. It's actually within our civilian sectors, our municipal and states, our municipalities, and businesses, candidly. And we're not mandating that they play under the same rules that we do. And so I don't know. That unknown concerns me about what vulnerabilities. I do see the intel, and it concerns me significantly. And I'm not allowed to collect intelligence in the homeland, something I would ask you to maybe ask General Barrett about. Is it time to reconsider our ability to collect intelligence in our homeland on potential vulnerabilities for our national security? I got lit up pretty well when I said that in front of Congress in a hearing. But my intent wouldn't be to spy on the American people. My intent would be to ensure from a national security perspective we understand the challenges that we face. Medical capacity. Medical capacity keeps me up, especially in the homeland. If we fight a large fight overseas, we sold off a lot of that capacity. Biodefense capability. One of the big lessons learned out of COVID was that you can bring a nation state to their knees with a bioweapon if you need to. And I worry about that going forward with our capability and capacity. And candidly, the strategy and policy have changed, but the capability to respond has not. And we need to make sure we understand that going forward. Okay, strategy. When I got in the seat, the first thing I focused on was policy. Okay, we've got some policymakers up here. We probably ought to ask some questions about policy. It was, tell me what I must defend. When I got in the seat more than 3 years ago, nobody had told me what to defend. Today, I've got defense policy. But defense only is not good enough in my mind. There are many things, second, third order effects, that feed inside the wire for defense critical infrastructure. And we need to understand exactly what that is as we go forward. I didn't want to focus on defense starting in the homeland. I think defense starts forward with our asymmetric advantage of our allies and partners and my fellow combatant commanders who generate effects forward, so I don't have to do that in the homeland. If I'm shooting down cruise missiles and defending in the homeland, then deterrence has failed and we've failed to defend forward. I started with an integrated deterrence strategy, and now you're thinking, well, he plagiarized the Department of Defense strategy. Actually, I signed my strategy in December of 2020, before this administration was even in office, and it focused on campaigning and resilience and demonstrating integrated deterrence with all levers of influence. And I would tell you that the FEMA administrator up here is a great partner in that. Our ability to show that resiliency has a deterrent effect as well. And our campaigning plan, not only for natural disasters, but each and every day to demonstrate our readiness, responsiveness, resiliency, and capability to operate, has an integrated deterrent effect. And that has been focused on 4 primary priorities for me. Domain awareness. If you can't see it, you can't deter it, and you certainly can't defend from it. And domain awareness goes from undersea to on orbit, and everything in between includes cyberspace. Okay, information dominance. The only thing I can never give the President or the Prime Minister of Canada enough of, or the Secretary of Defense or the Minister in Canada, is time and decision space. And the only way that we create more time and decision space is to take information, that domain awareness, process it faster with the use of capabilities such as machine learning and artificial intelligence, and then disseminate it to decision makers in a timely manner, which is what I call decision superiority. And all of this, it has to be under a foundation of global integration. There are no regional problems for the most part anymore, and the days of having a single supported combatant commander are over. As a matter of fact, in a crisis with the PRC or a crisis with Russia, the most likely supported combatant commanders first is probably either cyber or space, potentially Transcom or me, or even Stratcom. It's not likely going to be General Cavoli or Admiral Aquilino. They may be simultaneously, but they won't be a single supported commander. So those challenges, they're real, okay? Domain awareness has been something I've been focused on for a while. I'd ask you to think a little bit about that. Homeland Defense Design Next. We're talking about the future of Homeland Defense. I just put out a classified document on Homeland Defense Next. I don't think the future looks anything like the past. You know, I compete day to day for the same resources as Admiral Aquilino, General Cavoli, and others. The same F-22s, the same tankers, the same AWACS, the same DDGs from the Navy, everything the same. I don't have them assigned and allocated on a day-to-day basis. So as I come into the discussion in a crisis, I'm going to be submitting a request for forces that's going to compete directly with their O-plan forces, which makes their O-plans unexecutable at that time. We need to figure out how we're going to do this differently. You know, I have DSCA forces on a DSCA XORD, Defense Support of Civil Authorities XORD. Maybe it's time we do the same thing for Homeland Defense. And I don't have to own them. They don't have to be assigned to me or allocated. But they need to know they're responsible for, in a timely manner, being ready. Today, I would tell you that I'm going to be the LIMFACT when it comes to setting the Homeland. And I would ask you to ask John Evans, how are you going to get more effective and efficient at setting the Homeland in a crisis or a potential conflict? I would ask the Army to think different. Why does every single ballistic missile defense capability or ground-based air defense capability need to reside in one location in Fort Bliss, Texas? Why can't they be in Alaska to help me get there quicker, or maybe near the national capital region? Just something for you to think about as we go forward. I think the future of Homeland Defense is more autonomous. It's more unmanned. It's non-kinetic effectors to generate effects that can impact the precision, navigation, and timing of potential cruise missiles or other threats to our homeland. But it doesn't look like it does today. And I'd ask you to ask some tough questions of the team here. Okay, so as we go forward, I'd tell you a couple of challenges I face. We're not moving fast enough as a department. I had the privilege of testifying this year 12 times to Congress. And I say that not being sarcastic, 12 times. I welcome that opportunity to talk about the challenges it faces. The department is not going fast enough. We're using legacy processes to field capabilities. In today's virtually driven and software-driven environment, we're applying capabilities and processes like we're buying ships, tanks, planes, and automobiles, when we need to think differently to go faster. I would ask all of you to talk to your Congress people about how they're eroding our competitive advantage with their lack of decision-making to pass a budget in time. Anyway, I won't go too much further. They are part of the problem. And you need to tell them that. We need to move forward. And the department processes. So a couple of questions I'll tee up and then I'll get off the stage. So you might want to ask Administrator Criswell how she sees herself in our department, our national defense strategy, when it comes to integrated deterrence and resilience, and how she factors in. DASD Zimmerman, you might want to ask her a question along the lines of, when are we going to get the rest of the policy on what to defend and across the broader whole of nation? How are we moving forward to do that? And how are we going to go faster with those processes? You might want to ask Lieutenant General Barrett about the cyber that I talked about, and is it time to reconsider our ability to collect within our homeland and how we get after those cyber vulnerabilities that are outside of the department and outside of the federal government. And as I mentioned earlier, I'd probably ask John Evans, how are you going to set the theater in a timely manner where the commander of NORTHCOM and NORAD is not the LEMFAC when it comes time in crisis. Instead, we're able to set in a timely manner to empower those forward combatant commanders and our allies and partners. So thanks for the opportunity. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you, General VanHerck, for your comments. You've done an exceptional job of setting the stage for our panelists today. Before we begin, please allow me an opportunity to introduce our panelists today. Seated right here is Lieutenant General John Evans, Jr., the Commanding General of U.S. Army North 5th Army, which is headquartered at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. U.S. Army North is a theater and Army Service Component Command to NORTHCOM, the Geographic Combatant Command for North America. U.S. Army North's mission is Homeland Defense, defense support of civil authorities, and theater security cooperation. General Evans has served 3 tours with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment Airborne and commanded the regiment from 2012 to 2014. He also served as the Chief of Staff for the Army Fellows at the Brookings Institute, and after 3 years in command of the United States Army Cadet Command at Fort Knox, General Evans was selected for command of R North in September 2021. Next to General Evans, we have Ms. Deanne Criswell, who serves as Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. During her career with FEMA, she has reformed emergency management in Aurora, Colorado, coordinated housing and family reunification in response to Hurricane Katrina, led a FEMA Incident Management Assistant Team, or IMAT, that responded to severe floods in North Dakota, hurricanes in South Carolina, and fires in Colorado. From 2019 to 2021, she served as a commissioner of the New York City Emergency Management Department, where she led coordination of the city's response to COVID-19, including supporting the country's largest mass fatality program. Given this depth and breadth of experience, it was no surprise she was unanimously confirmed by the Senate as the 12th FEMA Administrator in April of 2021. She leads the nation's effort in helping people before, during, and after disasters. Administrator Criswell also has served 21 years in the Colorado Air National Guard prior to joining FEMA, including 2 tours overseas. Thank you again for joining us again this year. Next, we welcome Lieutenant General Maria Barrett. Lieutenant General Barrett serves as the Commanding General of U.S. Army Cyber Command, which operates and defends Army networks and delivers cyberspace effects against adversaries to defend the nation. Our cyber is engaged in the real-world cyberspace fight today, and against near-peer adversaries and other global cyber threats, they defend military networks, secure Army weapons platforms, and protect critical U.S. infrastructure. Lieutenant General Barrett has commanded units at the company, battalion, brigade level, including service as Commander 160th Signal Brigade, 3rd United States Army, and Commander, U.S. Army Network Enterprise Technology Command, the position she held prior to commanding our cyber. Finally, we have the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense, Integration, and Defense Support to Civil Authorities, the Honorable Rebecca Zimmerman. In this role, DASD Zimmerman is responsible for the development of Homeland Defense, defense support of civil authorities, and chemical, biological, and nuclear preparedness policy, including overseeing the implementation of policy, plans, and programs that address the emerging security challenges faced by this nation. Prior to her appointment, DASD Zimmerman served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Central Asia. She also has spent 2 decades as a researcher and policy advisor, including at the RAND Corporation and as editor-in-chief of War on Rocks and in the private sector. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to all the panelists joining us today. And before we begin questionings, I wanted to give each a few minutes of the panelists to make a few opening remarks. General Evans, sir, we'll begin with you and work our way down the table.
Hey, thanks, Jim. Let me just echo General VanHerck's thanks to the Association of United States Army, Lieutenant General retired Guy Swan, General retired Bob Brown for hosting this panel. You know, we have a very competitive forum here when we put the AUSA symposium together every year. Lots of folks competing for the contemporary military forums, and they continue to host this because I think what we are doing in the Homeland is incredibly important, and General VanHerck's comments obviously pointing to that. So thanks to AUSA. Sir, thanks for being our guest speaker yet again this year. We know you would rather be sitting in Missouri right now, but things being the way they are, we're glad you're still the boss. And we appreciate your comments, keeping us on point and setting the stage for a great discussion. I also want to thank the distinguished colleagues I've got up here. Every one of them is a colleague and friend. And I'll tell you, unlike a lot of the forums you may see here where you've got a bunch of Army guys or gals sitting up front, we've got a pretty diverse panel here with the FEMA administrator, with the our cyber commander, with our representation from policy working Homeland Defense and integration issues. We do that on purpose because what you're going to find is this defense of the Homeland thing is a team effort. And so I'll keep my comments brief because I really want to pass the mic on to Administrator Criswell and the other panelists. But I do want to just offer three really quick things. I think the first thing that I would offer is, and we'll get to this more because the boss, I think, prompted you to ask questions about it, is we need to understand that even though we're in the strategic support area here in the Homeland, even though our defense industrial base and most of our depots and a lot of our combat power and power projection platforms reside here, this theater is mature, but it is not set. And we don't have to think about setting the theater, or we haven't had to think about setting the theater in our homeland the way that we have to be thoughtful about it in forward theaters for years and years because we were not contested. Folks, we are contested each and every day here in the homeland. As General VanHerck will tell you, and he said this to Congress, we're in active conflict every day in the cyberspace and the information environment. And we've got to accept that fact and understand we're mature but not set. Secondly is the Homeland's different. And the Homeland's different because this is the lady I'm supporting every day. When we go downrange, DOD gets a large mandate. Combatant commanders work with ambassadors. They work with country teams. And generally, they get their AOR, and they get to conduct things the way they want to. And they lead that mission because it is largely going to be a military lead when we're in a theater of war. That is not the case in the Homeland. Each and every day, General VanHerck, our teams, his component commanders, are working with our interagency partners to make sure that we support them as the lead federal agency to set the conditions for a secure homeland. And then we can talk more during our discussion about how we do that for defense support of civil authorities and disaster response. But the boss hit the nail on the head. If our competitors and our adversaries look over the fence at us and see that we cannot handle disasters in our own homeland, they will not be deterred from testing us. So it's important that we be able to do that and do that well. And then finally, what I would tell you is I think we'll probably dabble into the discussion about critical infrastructure. I learned very early in this process that critical infrastructure is in the eye of the beholder. As my boss said, we've asked the Defense Department to tell us what they believe is truly critical. And though I can't go into detail about it, I will tell you it's a very small list. And so what we've got left, therefore, based on what the department views as also being important, what our other interagency partners view as being critical, what state governors and local municipalities view as being critical, those things that support operations and support our ability to project combat power, we've got to collectively defend that, and we've got to find ways to do that coordination and synthesize those effects. And DOD can't do it all. We're big, we're powerful, we certainly have the largest budget, but we can't do it all, even here in the homeland. And so I hope some of that will help you generate some questions for the panelists. And with that, I'll pass it over to Administrator Criswell.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Evans. It's just such a great honor to be back here again this year talking to all of you because this is such an important topic. And I'm really privileged to be on this panel. And I think, as you said, it represents the diversity of the people that need to come together to support this critical conversation. I wanted to just start, though, by saying thank you. You are our most trusted partner. You are our most trusted team that come in to help us through all of the different changes that we're seeing and the extreme weather events that we have been facing that have given us challenges that we haven't seen before. Whether it was the remains identification teams that supported us in Maui, or from the Army Corps of Engineers putting up temporary generation to stabilize the grid in Puerto Rico, or prior to Hurricane Ian last year in Florida, bringing together all of the different search and rescue teams to have them pre-staged because we knew it was going to be such a catastrophic event. Every time we call, you are always there, and we're calling you more and more and for different things. And so I think, as General VanHerck said, these environmental changes are creating more opportunity, though, at the same time. They're creating more opportunity because it's increasing our vulnerability, and it's giving them the opportunity to attack us in ways that we haven't faced in the past. And so the focus of this panel today is a conversation that is so important. And we need to continue to have this conversation day after day, because as I start to think about the threats that we're facing, they're different. And I think that was the other thing that you said. The future doesn't look anything like the past. I often say that the environmental threats, the climate change crisis, is causing us to respond to things differently today than we did 5 or 10 years ago. They will be different 5 or 10 years from now. And add into that then the complications of creating these vulnerabilities for people to further exacerbate our ability to support people, to defend people, to make sure that we have the ability to help people before, during, and after disasters. So we at FEMA, we've really had to take a step back and start to look differently at how we are approaching the future threats that we're facing, whether that is the increase in the number of climate-related events that we're having, climate-related, weather-related disasters, whether that's cyber attacks that we're supporting, or whether that is the border insecurity that we're facing, or the contested information environment. These are all things that are compounding against our day-to-day mission of going out and helping people respond to and recover from the natural hazards. And all of this is also happening with shrinking timelines. We're having less time to respond to the events that we typically respond to. We're getting less notice for the severe weather events. It gives us less time to warn people and help them evacuate and get to safety. The populations that we're supporting are growing. We've had a migration across the United States and moving into different areas where they're experiencing risks that they haven't experienced in the past. So we have to figure out ways to educate and reach out to people so they understand the types of risks that they're facing. And the vulnerabilities in our infrastructure are becoming more exposed. Just look right now at Louisiana, and because of the drought, we're having a saltwater infiltration into New Orleans, and we're having to support that, our first ever, FEMA's first ever emergency declaration for drought because of the impacts of that. This is just the beginning, and so we have to be able to come together in these kinds of environments and have these conversations about what these natural weather, severe weather events are causing our populations to have to face, but how do we also reach out into our communities and help them understand the compounding impacts of other threats that'll be out there. I recently had an opportunity to speak to all of our state directors, our state emergency management directors last week. It was their annual conference. And I turned a lot of heads because it was the first time that I had gotten up and I talked about what keeps me up at night. And it's not the severe weather events that we're going to respond to, because we're going to figure that out. We're going to do that. We do that each and every day. But it's these nation-state threats. It's the contested information environment threat that we're facing. It's the cyber attacks that are going to happen while we're responding to a natural disaster. We have to shift our mindset to start thinking about how we're going to collectively prepare for those types of events. But the problem that they have, the problem that I think we all have, is that we are constantly in this response mode right now. We are in response, recover, rinse, and repeat. We don't have the time to do, or the staffing, especially at our states and many of our small local jurisdictions, they don't have the capacity or the personnel or the resources to really think about the future and solely focus on how we can start to plan for that, because they're in this continuous repetitive cycle. So we have a lot of work to do. I'm excited for the rest of this panel and what we're going to talk about, because there's a lot of really tough challenges that we're facing today, and it's going to be the collective effort of all of us that's going to be able to address them. Thank you.
I think we're all going to need a little therapy after this panel. Thanks for having me on this panel, John. I really appreciate it. So when I look at the Army campaign plan and it says, hey, Army Cyber, come back and talk to us about what it means to set the theater. I really had to scratch my head for a little bit there as a functional command that has a global reach. 288 post camps and stations across the globe, 1.2 million users, and really we're in contact with the adversary every single day. And so what does it mean to set a theater? Wearing my Army hat, this is, of course, supporting all of the Army commands, to include the ones that are overseas. And really that means making sure that the Army networks are in a posture, the best posture possible, so that we are not having to scramble when we make the transition to crisis or conflict. And I do see this in terms of we are in competition now, and then we need to be prepared to shift to crisis and conflict. So obviously, Army North and the CONUS is a big part of that mission. When I put my purple hat on, my Joint Force Headquarters Commander on, I provide cyberspace operations support to 3 combatant commands, CENTCOM, AFRICOM, and then NORAD, NORTHCOM. And so the Homeland is very much in the DNA of the Army cyber enterprise thinking about this. When I start thinking about this and really making sure that we have the most resilient networks that we can have, I am very cognizant of the fact that outside of the fence line of every single one of our installations, there is that infrastructure that General VanHerck referred to that is commercially provided. And so a lot of work actually has been done in Army Cyber to start to think about those dependencies that some of our installations have and some of our other commands. So for instance, perhaps taking a look at key nodes in mobilization. What are those? What are the threats against those? And can we really have a good stare at that problem set so that we can be prepared? One, we can harden it, but we can also be prepared in the event that we see it under attack. Mobilization, that's not the only one. I think we'd also take a look at the critical infrastructure piece. And I'm going to tell you, actually, the Army has a qualitative and a quantitative advantage when it comes to understanding critical infrastructure. Could we do more? Of course. But let me explain this advantage. The Army made an investment in Compo 2 and 3 cyber protection teams. Over half of the cyber protection teams that we have in the Army are in Compo 2 and 3. And what those individuals really bring to the game is exquisite understanding from their day jobs in technologies that perhaps we have not put into the schoolhouse and have trained our active duty cyber protection teams towards. So that type of on-the-job experience is hugely valuable to us. I'm talking about cloud, and I'm talking about OT and ICS SCADA type of environments. I say the latter because, especially when it comes to the National Guard, when they are in their state active duty status, a lot of times what the state is asking them to do is go out and take a look at the state critical infrastructure. Now, I do think that I'd like to have a better idea of tracking what that is, not directing it, because that's at the purview of the governor, but what is it that has been looked at, and what kind of activities have been done? Has there been a hardening activity? Have they gone back in and assessed it again? Those would be hugely great data points to have at a time of crisis, because then we can apply the cyber protection team force in a much better manner and a smarter manner. So this partnership piece, great advantages in that space. From an operational technology, teams have already done a lot of work with the Corps of Engineers, critical waterways and dams. So really good there. The other thing that I would emphasize too from the relationship standpoint is we start to take a look at academia, industry partnership. These are pivotal for any sort of research projects that we think we need to do for unique capabilities that might advance the work that we're doing at Army Cyber. The relationships with industry, also very pivotal, especially at the Cyber Command level and the Cyber National Mission Force level. That sharing of information back and forth with industry, and you saw this probably if you go back and take a look at the National Cyber Strategy, you'll see more of a signal towards the cybersecurity industry starting to pick up more of the load for defending our nation. They have the capacity. They can do more with the insights that is being shared with them, and that only results in a better and more focused effort for defending the homeland. The last thing I would say probably is from a government and interagency standpoint, I left Cyber Command around 2018, went to NetCom, came back, and if you asked me to characterize in just those 3.5 short years, what did the interagency relationships look like in terms of exchanging information night and day? I attribute it to some of the hard challenges that we're facing from a cyber perspective. The occurrence of ransomware. We used to be only focused on nation-state adversaries, but we've really had to take a look at the ransomware actors as a key factor in the threat sphere as well. I would say it was also part and parcel of the election security group that the Cyber National Mission Force participated in. Those relationships with the interagency, particularly law enforcement, FBI, hugely valuable, because there's only so much that I can do with my authorities, but having those relationships where we can pick up the phone and say, what are you seeing? And then what can you do? They pay off. I can't explain it, but they do pay off. And then I think the last thing that I would say is, I don't think that piece about intel and the homeland. I am agnostic about where we get our information from. We do not have to shake and my predecessor used to say this, we don't have to shake the JWICS box and get everything out of there that we action. Commercially available information, publicly available information, it is out there, and it is hugely valuable to how we think about responding to the threat. If you think about just the Army's network of 1.2 million users, the insights that Amazon or Microsoft or Mandiant have with the millions of endpoints that they understand that threat picture, I can't ignore that, and I can't duplicate it. And so this is actually so I don't think it has to be intel. We don't have to trip over that U.S. person line.
Okay, well, so my hope is I can be brief, because so many good things have already been said, and it's a really good sign when OSD policy and the combatant commander are in lockstep about the threat, and basically sounds like we shared talking points before we came in here. So I will try to keep it a little bit brief. First of all, I'm so grateful to be back here with the Army. I'm not going to say it's my favorite service, but it's the service I spent a lot of time working with over the course of my career, and I'm very happy to be back at AUSA. I know that Assistant Secretary Dalton wishes that she could be here as well. This was really a highlight event this week for her. Unfortunately, she's been called to stay back at the Pentagon to deal with some fast-moving issues. So I'm going to do my best to cover down on her behalf. I'm also really glad to see how full this room is, because there was a time when a discussion on the Homeland was not going to garner a room this full. And my hope is that you all are here because you know that we are in a new intellectual space. Again, I think you've already heard a lot of details about why, but I would urge you all, I know we've got some think tank folks here in the room, and I know the Army is full of scholar practitioners. I would really encourage you all to be part of solving the intellectual challenges of the homeland that we have today. When we are not a sanctuary, what are we? How do we think about the world when fundamentally that place that we thought was unassailable is now being assailed on a daily basis in many different ways? Our adversaries are looking at Ukraine, are looking at Israel, and trying to draw lessons. What are the lessons that we need to draw from that for the homeland? So I would ask from all of you for your partnership in helping think through those things. As we do release policy guidance, helping us to think through what's missing, how it can be better applied, how we can all make sure that we're meeting this challenge of this particular and unique historical moment that I think we're in. It's unique not because of any of the single things that the folks at this table have said, but because in reality we will have to deal with all of these things at the same time, right? If you think about when Indo-PACOM was responding to the Maui wildfires, along with our National Guard, how would Indo-PACOM then have responded to a Taiwan threat? How do we think about doing multiple things at once? How do we think about wartime mobilization, homeland defense missions, and defense support of civil authorities, all of which can be happening simultaneously? And I think one of the biggest keys is resilience. And resilience for us has become really a core concept. For us, it's the ability to withstand, recover, operate through any disruptions to, transportation, logistics, supply networks, our ability to mobilize and deploy. How do we manage to think through resilient defense critical infrastructure to support our colleagues to resilient non-defense critical infrastructure? And for us, that is a part of deterrence, right? It is how we think about deterring our adversaries, is helping them to know that we are not easily assailed in the homeland or abroad. As a piece of that, I think because these challenges are so closely interknit, I think it's really important we develop intellectually the ability to differentiate between what is homeland defense and what is homeland security. When we talk about homeland defense, we're talking about primary mission of our military being to fight and win the nation's wars. In the homeland, we can think of that as a defense of sovereignty. When we think about homeland security, we're thinking about the broad range of threats and hazards that challenge American security on a day-to-day basis. In the former, we are supported. In the latter, we are supporting. And those definitions become increasingly important to us because we know that we cannot do all of the things, right? I mean, well, you're the Army. You're used to being told to do all the things all the time for all the people. But that is fundamentally not the recipe for success here. We need to disaggregate between when we are supporting and when we are supported so that we can prioritize those things that really need to be prioritized, our ability to fight and win the nation's wars. And as others have said, this all gets harder and harder in an environment where climate and our ability to change and adapt to meet the increasing problems of extreme weather, our environmental challenges in the Arctic, creates issues both for our support of civil authorities, for our FEMA colleagues. As they say, they will find a way to manage it, but we will be part of that solution. But it also creates Homeland Defense proper challenges when we look at approaches through the Arctic. So we are truly in a place that I don't think that we have ever been before, and where I think it's absolutely crucial that we really understand that our task has changed going forward. We need to partner with other interagency members. We need to partner even with our allies and partners in a substantially different way that keeps Homeland Defense, both for ourselves and even for our allies and partners, as the common thread that runs through all of our operations. So I'll leave it there.
All right. Thank you all for your opening remarks today. And we do have a fairly diverse panel up here representing the Army, OSD, and the interagency. And so we'll begin with how each of your organization, offices, agencies envision their role in Homeland Defense, particularly given the increased threats from our nation-state adversaries, climate change, and the increased destructive impacts from our natural events. Mr. Criswell, we'll start with you and move down the line.
All right, great, thank you. You know, I think as we've heard already, the threat landscape, the threat environment that we face today is changing. And so as it changes, our agency also has to evolve to help meet those challenges. You know, when I think about our climate, natural hazard risk environment, it is also changing. And I gave you a few examples, but I just want to give you a few more. Just this is 2023 numbers, or just some of the things that we experienced. We are already, and this was in early mid-September, maybe it was end of September, we had already set a record for the number of billion-dollar disasters for this calendar year. And we're still in hurricane season. I think it's post-tropical cyclone Philippe now, just won't go away. And we're continuing to see these significant events with more complex recoveries, longer recoveries. This year, we started the year with 3 Category 4 hurricanes, with Hurricanes Hillary, that was going towards California, Idalia on Florida, and then Lee, which hit Maine and Canada, right? These are threats that we're used to, but in different ways than we have experienced them in the past. And I continue to say, we've talked a little bit, and you've heard us say a little bit about Maui, but I mean, this is, in my time in this position, that is the second conflagration fire that we have faced. This wasn't a wildland urban interface fire. This was a fire that the fuel were the homes that was fueled by wind, right, that really accelerated that. And we had the same thing in Colorado just a year and a half ago. And so we're seeing different types of fire threats that are out there. And never in my professional career would I have thought, or have you would heard me say that I have teams responding to a wildfire, to a fire on a tropical island, while I'm responding to a hurricane in the desert at the same time. So we were responding to fires in Maui while we were responding to a hurricane in Palm Springs, California. I mean, these are just situations that we are seeing change day after day, and it's creating strain on our system. It's creating strain at FEMA, but mostly on our state and our local first responders. We also, this year, hottest year on record for the globe. We saw, excessive heat in Arizona and other places in the South. And how do we help people become better prepared for the types of extreme weather that they're going to see? We had the extreme heat in the South, but we also had those amazing blizzards in northern New York at the beginning of the year. And then I already mentioned that our first ever drought declaration, where we are now supporting Louisiana with some temporary measures to make sure that they can have safe drinking water because of the low levels of the Mississippi. So these are the types of severe weather events, natural hazards that we're facing. And I think what makes emergency managers so unique is the fact that we come together and we bring our collaboration skills and our coordination skills. And we're doing this for more than just severe weather events. We've also been called upon, since my time here, we responded to the East Palestine train derailment in Ohio, right? A responsible party that had a train derailment that created a lot of panic and fear in that community, but bringing in the emergency management agency to help coordinate and bring all of our federal partners together to help bring some sense of hope back to that community. We obviously played a critical role alongside all of you in our response to COVID-19, but we also addressed a baby formula shortage, and we had to do planning against the supply chain impacts and the impact it was having on baby formula. Never did I think that's what my teams would be planning for. And then we also responded and supported planning efforts for the cyber attack on the Colonial Pipeline. Right, all of these things are new situations that our emergency managers across this nation are continuing to face. And we know that this is just going to continue to grow. But I also want to add in that, and we talked about it earlier, that this also creates opportunities for our adversaries. And so in East Palestine, pro-Russian actors use social media to spread false information around that community, creating panic and fear across that entire community, something very hard for us to then get ahead of. We also have pro-China actors in Maui that were spreading the same type of information, building this distrust or additional distrust in the federal government, a place where there's already trust issues. And it really is limiting our ability to be able to get the necessary aid to these individuals that need it so desperately. So how do we work in this type of contested information environment? And these are the types of examples that we're continuing to face every day that we need to continue to work together on. Because what if it's not just a contested information environment? What if it's now physical impacts on the environment? What if the Colonial Pipeline attack was in the middle of our response to Hurricane Ian and it limited our ability to get fuel into those communities to help support their response and their recovery? And I think where we need to evolve as an agency is how we are helping to support our state and local partners. You know, all of our programs, our preparedness programs and our grant programs are still centered on 9/11 terrorist threats. We know that our threats are very different today. And so we as an agency have to continue to work on how do we change the mindset? How do we get Congress to allow us to be able to use these programs to help us better train and prepare our local communities for the threats that they're going to face in the future, because they certainly are different than the threats we faced on 9/11, and they will be very different than the threats we're going to face 10 or 15 years from now.
So I hinted at it in my opening comments, how we see the Homeland Defense play out. I think primarily in competition, it's going to be very much about making our networks as resilient as possible. We do this largely through NetCom, based out of Fort Huachuca and all their installation NECs. But also back at the headquarters, we're continuously taking a look at the intelligence that we are getting, determining whether or not we are susceptible to it, seeing if we have any data that matches that in our big data platform, and then making a decision whether or not we need to pursue that. At some point, I do see that largely being aided with machine learning or AI to do that even faster. But in doing this, I would tell you that it has saved us having to send cyber protection team. Is that me?
Cyber attack.
There it is.
Yeah.
It just happened.
Yeah. I have the dumbest watch on here, so it's not my electronics. But you know, this has actually saved the cyber protection teams having to deploy. And I say this because, again, if we're thinking about in crisis, this is the wrong time to be sending out the limited amount of force. In fact, a lot of what they can do remotely now, and they can do much faster because of the employment of some of the data analytics that we have, much smarter about how we're doing our hunting. Again, ruling out when I can go to a commander and say, with moderate to high confidence, I believe your network has not been penetrated. Hugely valuable. When I walk into a network that perhaps does not have all the bells and whistles that it should have, and I cannot make that determination. And so all of that work that we need to be doing needs to be done up front in this competition phase. The next thing, though, my head goes to the mobilization task. You know, looking at what FORSCOM and every installation commander has to go through in order to get their organizations out the door, to include Combo 2 and 3, MFGIs, power projection platforms, and those types of nodes. And then after that, if we're looking at sustained operation, Army Materiel Command is going to be calling me because they too have certain locations. They may not trip the level of tracking real critical infrastructure, but they are no less important because of the critical function that they play. And in fact, we've already had these discussions over the last few years with them. We know exactly where they would like to prioritize the work. Should there be some concern that we have to do? I think probably last thing I would say is when I'm thinking about the Homeland Defense problem set is there is a point. We know it's rare. We see it in the TTXs that we might do that. The Army Cyber Active Duty teams would be allowed to go operate off of the Army networks. It is something that we have to be prepared for. It's not the cleanest handoff. And deciding when that occurs, who it is, who's in support, but it is something that there is an eventual, in this spectrum of going to crisis to conflict, it is something that we do have to be prepared for.
So when we talk about our role in Homeland Defense, OSD policy, obviously our job is largely to set policy, to provide policy options to the Secretary, and in large measure to guide the implementation of the National Defense Strategy. So for us, really everything begins with the 2022 NDS. And that strategy states that the scope and scale of threats to the homeland have fundamentally changed, that the PRC and Russia now pose more dangerous challenges to safety and security at home. And so, if you read the NDS, our priority is defense of the homeland paced to the growing threat of China. Those challenges require a fundamental change in culture and mindset inside the department. And so that is a lot of the work that we do. Both the 2018 and 22 NDSs directed us to radically alter the focus of the department's planning, assumptions, threat perceptions, and many other things in order to focus clearly and appropriately on threats posed by the PRC, Russia, and to account for the reality that the homeland is at risk and in a very real sense is already under attack. So for us, this is a fundamental change in how we think about and execute the department's Homeland Defense mission. On the specific issue of climate change, the NDS recognizes climate change as a transboundary challenge that transforms the context in which the DoD operates. So for us, we view climate change as a shaping threat. It's directly affecting geostrategic, operational, and tactical environments in which we operate, and that has profound implications for U.S. defense policy across the board. I'm sure you guys are hearing this in other sessions, but particularly in the area for us of Homeland Defense. We've talked about the weather conditions and the lack of predictability of those conditions. They create complications on a day-to-day basis for our military installations, for example, elevating the risk of flooding at key bases. But we also need to understand, again, what the existential threats are to our nation and what it means to be resilient and how we can partner for a whole-of-government approach to national security. I'm very proud to say that many of the challenges that Administrator Criswell ticked off our department and our office have been involved in, from Maui to the baby formula shortage. Our U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is heavily involved across the board with pretty much they partner with FEMA on an incredibly broad range of things, and that work is really incredible. Our folks in Maui who were able to offer mortuary affairs support, I think it's been a really phenomenal partnership. Much of our work involves sort of informing and preparing the force to handle these challenges, how we train and prepare the force, how we conduct acquisitions with a mindset for resilience in the homeland, what scenarios we exercise, and how we can inject assumptions about homeland defense into that planning, where we focus intelligence and other information gathering. It is, our goal is to make it part of DoD's DNA. I think we've already discussed really the critical importance of resilience, but resilience is something that we can't alone foster. That requires partnership with other federal agencies. It requires partnership at the state, local, tribal, and territorial level, and it requires partnership in the private sector. And these are things that I think DoD and our federal partners are all really increasing our reach now in order to try to have those conversations, to build those partnerships so that we're not meeting each other on day one of a disaster. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks. So I guess for Army North, as one of the components for NORTHCOM, our role is a little less esoteric and a little more doctrinal and traditional, as you would expect. I have a responsibility. We talked about theater setting and what our responsibilities are there, but I'm the theater army for General VanHerck. So General VanHerck is charged by the Secretary to set his theater, and he generally will turn to me and go, "Okay, I need you to do the big part of setting the theater because you've got most of the mobility capability on the ground, networking capability, sustainment capability. We've got a theater sustainment command at Army North, and those types of things that you would expect in a forward theater. We would do that. The only difference is we don't have to open this theater. It is, generally speaking, it is not contested and it is open with regards to theater setting. So that's one of the roles we do. As his Army Service Component Command, I'm his integrator with the Army as well. So there are things that all the services have proponency for. The Army is the largest of the services. We have an awful lot of stuff with regards to mobility on the ground, obviously. We've got an awful lot of capability for sustainment, for networking capability, counter-mobility, survivability, those types of things. I'm the integrator for anything that we need with regards to that. And then I have another, responsibility, frankly, that the NORTHCOM commander charges all of his components with, that we haven't really talked about a lot, and because we don't really think about it as much in the homeland, but we've got partners and allies too. So when it comes to continental defense, I'm working continuously with Canadian land forces and principally Mexican land forces to make sure that as we take a look at what our shared interests are in homeland defense, we are complementing each other. And I think there's nowhere that we see this more prevalent than on the southern border. Mexico certainly has the most significant internal security challenge in the northern hemisphere in North America, just based on the type of crime that they have to deal with every day with the cartels down there. And so we understand that those present nexuses for those folks that might be our competitors or adversaries to move into our security environment and create risks for us there. So I work diligently with them. And then should the worst thing happen, and DASD Zimmerman kind of talked about the role of our department as a supporting element to the lead federal agency. But for Homeland Defense, in the security role, we support. In Homeland Defense, we're the lead. So if we find ourselves in active defense, I also am charged to be, if appointed to be so, the Joint Force Land Component Commander for General VanHerck to carry out those defense actions that are required in the homeland to ensure power projection, to defend critical infrastructure, and to provide support to other civil authorities if they need them. So that's kind of how we wrap into things with regards to our role.
Okay, now let's hear from the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to ask any questions at this time. Wait.
Yeah, if you can move to one of the microphones, that would be great. You feel free to line up behind them.
My name is William King from Booz Allen Hamilton. As our nation in the last 6 months to a year has really learned and documented a number of observations coming out of COVID. One was the importance of strategic communication. One was the lack of resiliency we have in our society as a whole, and the overdependence on the federal government being the go-to easy button for everything. So as DoD starts to look at its strategies and use of high-demand, low-density organizations like the Cyber Response Enterprise and the cyber capabilities, how are we looking to reorganize, particularly as those demands for other geographic combatant commands to pull those forces out of the United States? And from a FEMA direction, a lot of discussion about the reestablishment of the Civil Defense Corps so that we empower local cities, counties, states to be more capable, resilient, and functional to take care of themselves and less reliant on the federal government flowing in to take over everything. Thank you.
Hey, Rebecca, you want to talk about CRE modernization a little bit, or you want me to take that?
You can go ahead. I'll back clean up.
Okay. So it's interesting that you talk about what's going on with regards to, CBR&E and some of the hazards and threats that are out there. The department's currently undergoing a relook at some of the systems we put in place, really kind of in the post 9/11 era, when we thought that the biggest threat we might face in the homeland was going to be some type of weapon of mass destruction, but low yield, dirty bomb, chemical type thing, perhaps even something on the biological side. We learned an awful lot from our COVID experience, as you can imagine, and you talked about how we saw the gaps and seams in our resiliency as a nation because of that. And I think the department has rallied with other agencies to try to fill some of those gaps and seams and build better contingencies for the future. But specifically with regards to kind of the weapons of mass destruction piece, we are undergoing a modernization right now of our chemical, radiological, biological, nuclear response enterprise. We owe some answers back to the department on that. Northcom is leading that effort. We are providing a lot of assistance in that effort because most of those CRE forces belong to the JFLIC for employment. But we expect to have something to the department by the spring, and then we'll follow the Secretary's guidance thereafter.
And I'll just say, in sort of more general terms, I think you're quite right that COVID, for example, was a wake-up call, that when you have something which is not a national defense emergency, but that occurs across all 50 states, it can actually become a national security emergency, right? It can have elements that deeply challenge the Department of Defense in its response, and that we do need to be able to rely on private sector partners, and again, state, local, tribal, and territorial partners. And so we have expanded our efforts to really reach out to those levels, to include them when we do exercises, to include them in how we plan to make sure that we're working with them to bring their capacity up so that when we need them, they are able to step up. Now, will they be able to fully close that gap? And I have to say, by the way, that this is work that Administrator Criswell's team has been doing a lot as well, because they share the same challenge that that we have to make sure that the states are capable of doing all the things which are the state responsibility to do, so that we can do those things that are uniquely federal or that are uniquely Department of Defense.
And then on the FEMA side, on the question on the community resilience, really important topic, important question, because I think one of the things that we really do need to focus on is how do we get back to the old duck and cover days, right? When we used to have our civil defense drills. We are not part of conversations about creating a civil defense corps that was mentioned, but what we are doing is really restructuring our entire agency. So when you think of FEMA, you're not just thinking about us from a response and recovery standpoint, but you're thinking of us as a resilience agency. And that can cover helping communities become resilient to severe weather events, but it can also be personal resilience, community resilience. How do we get into these communities and educate people about the risks that they're going to face? We've done a lot of work over the years through our national preparedness campaigns to help people better understand the things that they can do. And I bet everybody here knows that they should have a go bag and that you should have 3 days worth of food.
But we have to take it more than that. We need to help people understand what their true risk is, and whether that is a natural hazard risk or whether that is a bad actor risk. That's the direction that we're starting to go, is how do we educate people now into the next level of understanding what your risk is, where you live, and then what is it that you need to do to help protect your family. And so we're focused on creating these resilience hubs in communities, these place-based approaches that get right down to the grassroots level of a community and help them better understand what these risks are and what they can do to come together as a community. Because as many of you, if you have come to support us in any of these events, or if you've been involved even on the side, our neighbors are our first responders. Our neighbors are the first ones that are out there, that are really getting in there to help the people that have been impacted. And so we want to generate more of that. We want to help enable our communities to help each other so they don't always need to rely on their government officials, whether it's local, state, or federal. And who has a 3-day supply of food?
All right.
Pretty good show of hands.
Okay, well, Sergeant Major, please.
Sir, or anyone on the panel, I've got a question on gaps and seams. Are you concerned gaps and seams exist between agencies, commands, and other services as it comes to the defense of the homeland in Guam and the Copa states?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one first. I'll tell you, and the boss talked about it a little bit up front when he talked about policy and where we've got to continue to take a look at what we're doing. And I think to OSD Policy's credit, they are doing that. They're aggressive in that space. We've seen over the course of the last couple of years re-looking at some of our old models, old templates for how we do things. I mean, the world is moving at the speed of nanoseconds now. And so things like intelligence, we've got to find ways to be better informed about what our intelligence preparation of the battlefield looks like in the homeland, and we can't always rely on federal agencies that have all of the authorities to be able to collect stuff and then to pass it off to us. We've got to work harder in that space. I think there also are natural fissures that occur in the interagency process. We've seen a lot done since 9/11 to close some of those and to bring them together into security forums and support forums where they can share information. DOD is certainly part of that. And I think the thing that we do kind of at our level is we farm out expertise. So Administrator Criswell has 10 FEMA regions across the country. She's got a regional administrator at every one of those regions, and sitting right next door to that regional administrator is an 06 that works for me, with a small team that can rapidly expand to be about 30 or 40 military planners. And their job is to be the problem solvers before things percolate to the national level with regards to response options. So that's just one example of where we fill the gaps and seams, but I think there's work left to do there.
I don't need to add a whole lot to that, but I will just say, I mentioned before that the challenge is not any one thing that we have to do. The challenge is going to be doing all of them at the same time. And that's really where I think we need to exercise, we need to plan to figure out how to cover down on multiple different types of challenges simultaneously.
Okay, sir, please.
Thank you. I'm John Harper. I'm a reporter with the Fence Scoop. My question is for General Barrett. Are there any specific technologies or authorities that you don't have now that you feel like you need to better address emerging threats in the cyber domain when it comes to defending the homeland?
I mean, generally speaking, if you, I would say the application of AI and ML to our craft, and I alluded to that in one of my previous statements. It is something that I think the Under said it in one of his panel sessions, as compared to where the industry is today in their adoption, we could do better across the Army, across the Department of Defense. And so this is something that we're looking at very seriously because of that speed factor. We also are looking at it from the standpoint of just the sophistication that we think we're going to be up against. Again, I can use the example in an open source way of ransomware actors, what has transpired in terms of what they were doing 5 or 7 years ago to what they're doing today, and what if they are actually start using AI and ML to find vulnerable systems in local utility networks, et cetera, wow, there's a scope and scale to that problem set that becomes very real. And then what does it mean from both the, defend the DODIN and then expanding out to this Homeland problem set? I feel like we have to actually start employing this on the Department of Defense networks, get our reps and sets in. We know how to hunt sophisticated actors. Now let's do this in a way that we can reach some speed and scale, and then turn that back, those TTPs back out. From the authority standpoint, the work that the Cyber National Mission Force is doing is really groundbreaking. That's not part of my organization, but their Defend the Homeland mission is so unique and so impactful in terms of where they operate. They'll actually get on to partner networks. They'll bring that information back. We'll make everybody better for it. But there's also this piece of the work that we do is vitally important to the pursuit of those actors in gray space and red space. We can't do it in blue space. We can't do it in the continental United States. That's somebody else. And that's okay. We have relationships with them. When we work together, it is actually very effective. And again, I'll use the election security group activity that they did during the last election. Very, very effective. And so, I think that's okay. Could I ask for more authorities to operate off? I think there's a process for working off our networks when conditions are required.
Okay, thank you. Sir, please.
Good afternoon. What a great panel. I'm Paul Knapp. I'm the Adjutant General for the state of Wisconsin. I'm also oversee emergency management. So, Administrator Criswell, I got the opportunity to hear you last week at NEMA, and that did definitely raise eyebrows. Your speech, it was great. And it was great to hear because it really talked about a lot of the same things that we are talking about now, but haven't been talked about amongst emergency managers for ever. So thank you for that. And my question has to do with setting the theater. And so if we are in a contested environment and we're already under attack here in the Homeland, then obviously now is the time to set the theater. And being an Adjutant General, my question for General Evans primarily, but the rest of the panel is, how can we better leverage our DISCA first responders, which is the National Guard, in setting the theater?
Yeah, hey, thanks for that question, Paul. And Paul's one of our great partners with Army North and NORTHCOM. When we were hosting our Afghan guest a little over a year ago at Fort McCoy, he was essential to that effort to help us with that as we were supporting DHS. So thanks for that, Paul. I think it is a holistic effort, right, with regards to how we do it. It's a whole of government, but it's also very much a whole of service for the Army, but a whole of DOD process. What we're trying to do is leverage the expertise that exists across the country in different spots. We have a theater posture review that is an ongoing, continuous process where we go out to certain critical parts of the power projection infrastructure or the movement infrastructure, and we assess everything on the installation, whether that's what's going on in the network, what's going on with force protection, what's going on with the arteries that come in and out of there. And frankly, having been a senior commander for 6+ years at 3 different installations, this is a scorecard we give them that isn't supposed to be pejorative. It's supposed to make them aware of the fact that, hey, even though you're protecting your camp, post, or installation, and you can do your mission as 1st Infantry Division or 4th Infantry Division and project combat power off your railheads, these are things you need to think about that are gaps for you. And they don't get a chance to look at that or stare at that. And I think that's my responsibility as we do this theater posture review. We can leverage our guardsmen and reservists because they have the expertise at so many of these places, and They have the expertise of being, in many cases, many of them first responders in their day jobs. And we saw this play out in COVID. We said, hey, we got a great idea. We'll just we'll activate all of the reservists that are medical guys, and we'll put them in the hospitals. How'd that work out? Well, they were already in the hospitals doing their day job. So, but this is something we have to acknowledge, right? Because what we find is, being in the military is kind of an action-adventure sport. So what do action-adventure people do in their real lives? They do action-adventure stuff. They're cops and firemen and paramedics and, emergency managers, people that are dealing with, crisis day to day because they're good at it. So I think we can leverage that in lots of different areas as we start talking about tying together the infrastructure piece with what we're doing at our nodes that are going to facilitate movement as we flow things out of the theater. So that's what my team is focused on. I'm leveraging my DCOs that are working with the RAs in the FEMA regions for some of that connective tissue, and we're always working with our component leads on that as well.
But I think what I would add on to that is it just really demonstrates that we really do have a finite set of resources, right? It's not endless, and DOD is often the easy button for many, right? Whether it's our National Guard with our governors or whether it's bringing in the reservists like we did during COVID and many other things that we do. And so we're taking a step back and also looking at how do we tap into our enterprise? How do we tap into our emergency management enterprise across the nation? We have lots of capability out there and develop a system that can move them around to support the increasing need in different parts of the country. And so I use our USAR teams as an example. Our USAR teams are made up of local first responders, and we federalize them and we send them out to go do amazing work. We are piloting ways to do that with emergency management teams to go out and fill in some of the gaps that we're seeing across the country and going in and supporting and backfilling some of the smaller jurisdictions that maybe don't have the capacity that they have during the initial response or ongoing recovery efforts. And I think that's going to become even more critical when we are now faced with this finite set of resources in a competitive resource adjudication environment, when you're going to be calling up people to support the defense mission, but I'm still going to have the helping people during their response and recovery efforts simultaneously. So building out our network of that enterprise of the emergency managers across the nation to come in and support is going to be a critical component of that.
Yeah, so I take a look at the National Guard and Reserve, more so the National Guard on their CPTs. I mentioned before, I'd really like to, I know that I can't necessarily task them to go to point A or B, but absent of guidance, could I shape that and say, hey, here's something that I think is a critical node outside of the gate of Fort whatever. Would you be willing to take a look at that? Do you have the relationship? Yes, I know. I know. And so I also want to get to the point of where this isn't just a measure of performance, that they went and they did it, that I'm actually communicating to them, this is the type of information that we'd like to have back and have that visibility so that everybody can see it, whether it's us or whether it's General Evans here at the point of crisis, that we know that this is. So I want to get past measures of performance. I want to get to measures of effectiveness in terms of what did you see, what did they do? And I realize there might be some sensitivities there. I think we're just going to have to work through that, because I do think this is, at the time of crisis, having that connective tissue. The other thing is getting into a routine basis of, when they are drilling, creating a system where we can do an analyst exchange. The intel that underpins some of our cyber operations is really important to being effective. And so let's have that analyst exchange where we might be having a persistent stare in a particular adversary or TTPs or problem set. All right, let's get on the JWICS terminal. Let's have that conversation and create that muscle memory for in extremis. We know how to pull this team together and push things out very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Sir, please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Peter Santana from IBM Research, and it's a great panel. I took a lot of notes. But I wanted to ask two specific questions in this context. Given the investment Department of Transportation and Energy is making on electric vehicle infrastructure in the country, this is a new dimension in terms of cyber attacks and physical attacks on systems. And what are we doing about that, even though we're still trying to figure out what the structure should be? So that's the first one. And the second problem, particularly in the context of FEMA, which is dealing with multiple emergencies at the same time, and also the need for responding quickly to these emergencies, how much of actual modeling are you doing? Given the data problems you actually explained, it's very difficult to get the local data from the local agencies. So how much of the modeling are you doing? Because modeling could potentially help you to figure out what resources where you need and how you can manage the whole complexity in some decent way.
You want me to start?
Go ahead.
I can start on both of those a little bit. You know, the EV conversation is really interesting. Right before this, I was over at our emergency training center in Emmitsburg, Maryland, on a panel with all of the different fire organizations that are out there. And not from the cyber perspective, but from the response perspective, it's a huge challenge for us. And even as we talk about the recovery in Maui right now, part of the reason that the removal of debris is taking so long is because we don't know how to manage and handle all of the EVs that are out there and how they can disarm them, right, and make them safe. And so it is becoming an increasing challenge. And I asked them, do we have training? Do we have adequate training for our firefighters? And no, we don't have the research to even develop the training or the tactical training for it. And so we have a lot of work to do in that space, just from our response side of it. But on the modeling piece, it's incredibly important. And again, what I really am trying to preach across the nation is that when you think of FEMA, you don't think of us as just a response and recovery agency. And we certainly do modeling. We use AI to help us identify the areas that are most impacted after a disaster, but we're also using it to help people better understand what their future threat is going to be. And we have developed a national risk index, getting input in from some of our other partners. And we're in the process of creating the next version of that. But it's these types of tools that we want to be able to use to, one, help just the average citizen understand what risk is in their area, but more importantly, help our communities understand the types of threats that they can experience in the years to come with the changing climate and the data that we can get from NASA and from NOAA, and combine that with their population growth and the aging infrastructure, and what is that going to look like for them in 10 or 15 years? You know, I just think about New York City has had 2 massive flash floods in my time here, one that had a large loss of life. It's a combination of the changing climate, aging infrastructure, increased population, and lack of building codes. Right, so how do you bring all of that together to help a community understand the steps that they have to take to protect them? And so we have teams that are working on this, but we need help getting that information out to our local jurisdictions so they can use this information to make their appropriate plans, develop mitigation projects to help protect their communities.
Good. Sir, please, we'll get to you next.
Good afternoon. My name is Gunnar Shalene. I'm a chapter member in San Diego. I'm very intimidated by this panel because I really don't have the technical knowledge to ask this question the way I would like. But I'm thinking of the national electrical grid, and I'm thinking of cyber security and attacks. I'm wondering if our electrical grid should it be a national grid, or should there be segments and little pieces so it all doesn't go down at once? So maybe you can figure out what I'm trying to ask there.
You want to talk about it from a cyber side, and I can talk about it from a response side?
Yeah, I'll draw the analogy of networks. It won't carry over completely to the grid. We're in the process of flattening all our networks and consolidating them. And I was asked the question, well, won't that make them inherently, if you have an intrusion, then everybody's affected by it instead of all these little fiefdoms that we did have. And what I said, I actually can defend it better because then I can see it better. So I don't know if that necessarily carries over to the grid, not being an electrical engineer. But I think it does lend you some thought about are you able to identify how things, when the grid is affected, are there places where you can start to defend it earlier? And I actually think that is built into the grid, with the exception of when you have an isolated grid, like some states do. Sorry, Texas, right? And Hawaii, I'll go to Hawaii. The power has nowhere else to go. It has nowhere else to offload. And so the checks and balances, the way the regional systems work, actually, that is built in to isolate. Now, the question is, can you attack the grid in such a way that you can cause the cataclysmic brownout because you've basically made the Hawaii or the Texas scenario with the rest of the interconnected grid? I think the engineers are going to tell you that's hard to do, but I do think that informs us in terms of making sure that I think it would be really hard. I think there are other ways. When you start taking a look at a kill chain for having an impact, you start to look at some other weakest links. That might not be the weakest link that we need to take a look at.
And I think I'm going to answer that question from the perspective of how we deal with the consequences of the impacts to a grid. So when there's a natural disaster that comes in, it happens. We can pretty much get with the experts and know about how long it's going to take to restore that grid. And so we know what type of services, what type of resources we're going to have to bring in to support that community, and we pretty much know what that timeline is going to be, and we can communicate to the public of what that's going to look like. But when it comes to an attack on the grid, that's where we don't know. Is it going to be a week before it's back up? Is it going to be a month? Is it going to be 6 months? Are you in Vermont in January? Or are you in Arizona in August? All of those factors really complicate the ability for us to figure out what the consequences are going to be from the loss of the grid. And so we have started to shift our planning into more of a time-phased approach, right? So if we think, talking to the experts of when they think it might be able to be restored, if we think it's going to be, a week, these are the steps that we can take. If we think it's going to be a month, these are the steps that we can take. These are the services that we can provide. And when it would trigger our authorities to go in and support a community under our Stafford Act authorities to give them the resources they need to help minimize the impact to the community and the suffering that that community might experience. And it'll be different if it's a week. Again, if it's a week without power in Vermont in January is very different than a week without power right here, right now, right? And so all of those factors are really complicating our ability to really assess what the consequences might be and the type of services that we're going to have to bring in. And so we are really having to shift our conversation about how we're going to approach a cyber attack on the electrical grid.
I'll add one thing, too, just kind of wearing my boss's hat for a minute. So our post camps and installations are not enclaves unto themselves, right? We may have power generation capability, we may have water purification capability, but almost all of them operate based on the local community grid system, right? Electricity, water, sewer, all of those things are provided to us like they would be any other community. There are some exceptions out there, and the department is moving out, I think, on some initiatives to make us more resilient in that regard. But what affects the populace with regards to power is going to affect our military installations as well, and that's a point of concern.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Can I just add a really quick, because it affects some of the things that we've talked about previously, particularly with the Guard, I think it offers a useful case in point, right, which is the resilience is not just the resilience of the grid itself, but it's of the personnel system that actually would be responsible for managing this. So, if you have the person who works for the company and actually knows the grid and works in the ops room, who's supposed to help get it back up and functional, who is also a guardsman who will be supposed to be distributing food and water, because people can't do things that people normally do because there's no power. And if it's a cyber attack, are we also trying to decide whether that particular guard unit should be mobilizing for nation-state conflict, right? So I think it actually, when we talk about resilience, it actually, if you think about the people piece of this, I think it also highlights really some of the dilemmas that we're kind of talking about up here.
Thank you. Sir, please. You'll be next.
That's a great question. I want to add one thing to it. Just recently, we brought together about 20 to 30 CEOs out of the energy sector, if you will. I think the team did a great job. I agree with General Barrett that it's likely you can't bring it all down. Here's what's concerning to me, is the supply chain. And the vast majority of our large transmitters, or transformers, sorry, I'm not an engineer. Transformers, guess where they come from? They come from China. Okay, and today they're being consumed in the Ukraine, and it's created a global shortage of the transformers. And I'm not going to go into details on how long it would take for a U.S. enterprise to pick that up, but let's not let's say it's just more than months, okay? But that's a vulnerability in the supply chain. And there's more vulnerabilities we found in COVID and other places that contribute directly to resiliency that I think it's important to take a look at.
Thank you, sir. Sir, please.
Great. Larry Dobbs from Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. This has been a great discussion. I've also taken just a ton of notes here. You know, one thread that we've had throughout this discussion has been how the interagency has come together in the cyber domain against this evolving threat over the last decade or so. Sir, in your opening remarks, you spoke about the Arctic as a new domain that we need to be thinking about and the challenges there. I wonder if you all would speak to what the potential evolving threats in the Arctic and how we need to come together as an interagency to counter those threats.
Yeah, I'll start, and I think the boss hit it. You know, he knocked it out of the park talking about the fact that we've not made the investments in the Arctic that we need to make. For our services standpoint, we are working with the Army to try to do some of that right now. The boss talked about air defense specifically, right? If you take a look at what the role is, whether it's in his NORAD hat or NORTHCOM hat, and you take a look at what the shortest route is to the homeland for missiles, even non-ballistic missiles, that's coming over the poles, and we have very little capability up there to deal with that outside of mid-course defense type stuff. We've also got significant challenges with resupply and sustainment in the Arctic. People think of Alaska as, hey, it's Alaska. It's another one of the states. It's easy. Everybody lives good up there. Go to Anchorage. You'll love it. Let me tell you, 80% of everything that goes into Alaska comes through the Port of Valdez. You're not going to drive the Alcan with big military convoys to resupply Alaska. You cannot afford to soak the Air Force by sending C-17s up there on constant sorties to bring things into Alaska. We've got stuff that we could pre-position now in the Arctic. We may not have stuff. We could buy stuff that we could pre-position now in the Arctic that would give us the ability to respond much, much quicker if we find ourselves up there. And if you add to the fact that if we're dealing with an Indo-PACOM scenario, just about all of our force structure that's in Alaska goes somewhere else when the fight starts, right? So we've got to backfill not just capability and infrastructure and weapon systems, but people. And so there's some things we can do from a facilities investment standpoint. We'll tell you, because we've looked hard and long at this in NORAD and NORTHCOM, it is very, very difficult to operate for months on ends when the temperature is 35 below zero. There's nothing that we own that can do that, unprotected. Nothing. We don't build anything that does that. It's all got to go into a shelter of some type, whether it's a fighter airplane, whether it's an Army ground generator, a Patriot missile system. We've got to make some infrastructure investments up there, or we are going to be ill-prepared to meet the threat. So that's just a handful of things.
Yes. Okay. All right. Sir, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Joe Driscoll. I'm from the Fort Leonard Wood Mid-Missouri chapter of AUSA, and glad to be here. I'm kind of intimidated speaking after a physicist over here. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for this excellent panel. You all make me proud and confident to be an American, knowing that we have such great thinkers and actors in charge of our national defense, and it's just a really, really great session. So the question I want to ask General Evans in particular is, if that day comes when we have a truly catastrophic national disaster here, whether it be from a foreign adversary or the New Madrid Fault, close to where I live, back in Missouri, how confident are you that the Army is best prepared to work with National Guards, with state and local officials, with others, based on your prior experience from working with those organizations? And where my question goes is the collective training, the actual practicing, the actual response, is it enough? And does there need to be any kind of other collective training put in the mix to respond to that day?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when you start talking about Cascadia subduction or New Madrid, these really, really big once-in-a-lifetime events, that would be just, really kind of a national event at every level, despite the fact that they're regionally focused. I'll tell you that we have a very robust exercise program at NORTHCOM where we talk about those worst-case scenarios and we walk through that. As General VanHerck indicated earlier today, he doesn't have kind of forces sitting on a bench waiting to do stuff for him. So when these bad things happen, we have to go back to the department and we have to request forces to respond. Now, speaking for my service, we keep certain forces that are on different exorgs that are kind of available for stuff like that. The other services do the same thing. So we have an ability to respond. I think what we have to consider is, what does FEMA need us to do in that response? How many regions are going to be affected? And how do we layer in additional capability for them? And we both have a plan for that. I can pick people up from one region that's not affected and move them over to support the FEMA region that's being affected. And then the other thing we have to kind of wrap our minds around is there are going to be people, first responders, FEMA officials, military members that are affected by this as well, right? So we've got a little bit of self-aid we've got to do to take care of our team. So all of that are factors that we have to consider. But we practice New Madrid, we practice Cascadia, we practice, the big volcanoes. We go after these big things, and frankly, I think next year we've got a national level event that FEMA's hosting out in Hawaii. Is that right? Yeah. Where we're going to talk about some of these really bad things, and it's interesting based on what's going on in Maui now that people were saying, well, maybe that's not realistic to be out in the islands. Well, maybe it is, right? But I think we've got more work to do to deal with these large-scale events. And frankly, if I were looking for an opportunity to attack the homeland, I'd wait for hurricane season, or I'd wait to see one of these major faults disrupt, or I'd wait for a big, Cascadia volcanic event. Why wouldn't you take profit during that opportunity right there? So we've got to be prepared to do that. Like DASD Zimmerman said, all of these things tend to come with simultaneity, and that'll be advantageous to our competitors and adversaries.
Appreciate it, Joe. Okay, we have time for one more. Sir, please.
Hello, my name is Rastislav Janota from the National Security Authority in Slovakia. I used to serve as a National Cyber Director. Now I'm at the embassy. My question is, within the multi-domain operations in defense, the preparedness is pretty important part. Cyber is a little bit different story than most of the other domains. The role of the Army or the federal government, whatever government, within our distributed internet and connected world is very much limited. So preparedness means resilience for me, and the increasing of the resilience means working of almost every entity in the nation. So my question is, how are you touching these things? Official or different surveys said that motivation, major motivation for the company doing cyber or beginning with cyber is compliance. In some studies, it's 95%. So are there any plan or strategy how to increase, let's say, work on cybersecurity within the mass market? I'm not talking about critical infrastructure. For me, a list of critical infrastructure companies is kind of artificial, where we believe, or in some cases we are sure they are important, but they are dependent very much on many others. We touched here supply chain security, which is only one part, but the connection in our connected world is much, much stronger. So where are we with these things? Thank you.
So you're touching on a topic that is critically important. In the Department of Defense, I think the estimate is about 30,000 cybersecurity or cyber professional shortage. And so that might lend you to believe that we're just going to go out and recruit harder out in the workforce to satisfy those shortages. Not so fast, because across the U.S., the estimate is at 700,000 shortage. So we're competing out there with everybody else who is trying to fill industry seats or our commercial, our internet provider, our cable provider. We're all battling for the same talent. So unless we're going to get serious about really growing the pipeline, and so when I'm out and I'm talk to my local AUSA chapter, I thank them for everything that they're doing to stimulate STEM in our school systems, run programs for disadvantaged kids, to expose them to computer networking as early as possible, because whether they come into the military or not, whether they become a DoD civilian, they work for industry, that's fine. If you're in the IT sector and industry in this room, how hard is it for you to hire people, right? You are competing for the same workforce. And so I think this is something that we actually have to take very seriously. But we're not going to be able to people our way out of this. We actually have to innovate and think differently about how we get things done at the same time while we're trying to close this gap. And if we don't, I just don't think we're going to reach the speed and scale that we need to for the threats that we're going to be facing. The way that IT has pervaded so many functions, we talked about the electric vehicles, there's a component of that, OT, the critical infrastructure, and then just getting down to the computer that's in front of you. This is only going to increase. Again, we can't people our way out of it. They'll be a part, and we need to make sure that we're giving them the skills that they're going to need for tomorrow. But we've got to innovate as well and take advantage of some of the emerging technologies that are going to help us with that. And honestly, again, I can't imagine that our competitors will not use those emerging technologies.
Okay. It's time to bring this to a close. I want to first thank the audience for their thoughtful questions. I really do appreciate it. Thank you to the panel. General VanHerck, thank you for the opening comments. We really appreciate it. And then thank you to AUSA for putting this forum on. And have a great evening and all the best to you and your families. Thank you.
It's so nice to meet you.